Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're glad to have you on the webinar today. Today's webinar is all about SAP BusinessObjects BI 4.2. And so what we aim to do in this webinar is give you the headlines about 4.2. What are the big new features, the things that you need to know about to be successful in 4.2, not only in the upgrade to 4.2, but once you're there, what are the big things that you need to know in order to fully take advantage of this tool? My name is Adam Lang from A-Lang Consulting, and this will be the first of, I think, a series of webinars that we'll do on various topics, kind of a reintroduction of us here. So A-Lang Consulting is a reporting and analytics firm. We offer services specialized to higher education. We have a unique focus on community colleges, four-year institutions, and all of the reporting and analytics strategies, technologies to make those institutions successful in data-driven decision-making. On the technical side, we focus on tools like SAP BusinessObjects, Tableau, Microsoft Power BI, SQL Server, things like that. So today's webinar will focus, as I said, on SAP BusinessObjects, but stay tuned for future webinars where we'll be looking at other tools like Tableau. So as we go through this will be a very kind of informal sort of webinar. Just so you know, the webinar will be recorded. So if you ever want to refer back to it later, or you want to share the link with your colleagues, you're free to do that. We'll send out the link to the recording after the webinar. Also, as we go through this, certain questions may come up in your mind. Any questions, requests that you have, feel free to enter those into the question panel that you see in the webinar. Steve Thatcher from A-Lang Consulting, he's also on the line, and he'll be monitoring those questions as they come in, and I'll kind of defer back to Steve. He can read out the questions, and we'll try to answer what we can here live. And if there's anything that we need to get back to you on, we'll certainly do that. Okay. So before we get started with the kind of meat of this, keep in mind that all of the resources that you have available to you, just in general with SAP BusinessObjects, but specifically with 4.2. So after you leave this webinar, you'll have a lot of information about this new 4.2 version. We'll show some live demonstration. We'll give you a lot of information. You'll have the recording to go back to. But I also strongly recommend that you check out these links as well. So these are links to the official SAP websites where you'll be able to get information, documentation, users guides, installation manuals, etc., related to this new 4.2 version. So this top link here is where you'll go to find information about web intelligence. So there's a user's guide there, there's what's new documents, etc. This middle link is where you'll go for information about the BusinessObjects platform. So this is more geared towards your IT folks, your system administrators. That middle link there, you'll find things like installation guides, supported platforms, documents, things like that. And then this bottom link is good for everybody. So this bottom link is SAP's YouTube channel where they have a lot of video tutorials. So these are just kind of like short video clips about various features of web intelligence. So you can go there to find short little video clips about these new features, some existing features, etc. They're just really handy, brief video tutorials. So I definitely recommend checking that out as well. Okay, so let's get started. So there's I think, looking at the attendee list, I think most all of you are already on 4.1. So you're now at the stage where you've been on 4.1 for a while now, 2 or more years, and you're now looking at going to 4.2, or you're sort of waiting to be able to go to 4.2. And you might be wondering sort of what's in it for us. What are the new features of 4.2 that are actually going to impact my day-to-day reporting life? What are the things that are going to benefit me? What are the things that I need to know to make sure that I'm taking full advantage of this tool? Now, SAP has invested a significant amount into the web intelligence tool over the past few years. 4.2 was first released about 2 years ago. SAP first released 4.2 about 2 years ago. And they are right now on support package 5. So that's SP5. SP5 was just released in December. So from the time that 4.2 was released a couple years ago to now, SAP has put out a bunch of new features. So 4.2 is quite packed with a lot of new stuff. What I'll do here in this webinar is I'll first look at what's new from the perspective of web intelligence. And then a little later on, I'll look at what's new from the perspective of the platform, what's new from the perspective of like a system administrator. So I'll go through that later. But first, let's look at what's new on the reporting side. So if you're somebody who creates reports, modifies reports, you're really in there working in web intelligence, these are some of the new features that are going to make your life hopefully a lot easier. We've been working with 4.2 internally here at A-Lane Consulting for a couple of years now, and then we also have customers on 4.2 as well. And it's been such a pleasure working with 4.2, really. I mean, 4.2 is so much better than 4.1. A lot of new features came out that improve the quality of your reports, make the process of creating the reports much more efficient, much more productive. So what you see on the screen here is just kind of highlights of some of the biggest new features in 4.2. But for the purposes of this webinar, we're going to focus on the headlines. And that's these that you see highlighted here. So let's start with the first, and I think probably the biggest new feature in 4.2. So a little background for those of you who have been using web intelligence reports for many years now, you'll know that SAP has always made it so you can create web intelligence reports or modify web intelligence reports in 2 tools or 2 clients. These are the Java editor and the HTML editor. So the HTML editor was always a faster editor. It loaded more quickly. It had less compatibility issues. It didn't care as much what browser you were using or what version of Java you had or anything like that. But the downside of the HTML editor is that it was missing a lot of core components, missing a lot of important features that you would have needed in your reporting. So for example, it used to be that in the HTML editor, you couldn't create custom number formats, or you couldn't do conditional formatting, like conditional highlighting. You couldn't connect your reports to an Excel file, these kinds of things. And so what you always had to do is you had to go to the Java version of web intelligence. And the downside of that is that the Java version was slower, took a while to load. If you weren't using the right browser, if you didn't have the right version of Java, it could be very, very fussy. And I'm sure many of you all know that, or familiar with that, and have been burdened by that in the past. And now in 4.2, SAP has made a real effort to create a parity between HTML and Java. So now in 4.2, and especially in this latest version, SP5, you really only need the HTML editor. You can basically ignore the Java editor, which means that you don't need to worry so much about what browser you're using. You don't need to worry about, oh, if I update Java, will that no longer allow me to go into Web Intelligence? You don't need to worry about that. You can now just load your Web Intelligence documents in the HTML version. It's faster, it's easier, doesn't have the compatibility issues, and it now has all the same functionality as the Java version. So that is a huge benefit, both for the users who are in there leveraging Web Intelligence every day, and for the folks in IT who are trying to kind of manage that whole compatibility around that Java thing. That's all a thing of the past, so it's now HTML, much easier. And in fact, when we go into Web Intelligence in here in a little bit, I'm going to be logged into Web Intelligence giving some live demos. Everything that you see today will be using the HTML version of the editor. I'm not even going to open the Java version, so we'll really just be using the HTML. Okay, so while I open up Web Intelligence, we'll get started looking at some of the new features in real time. Steve, I'll turn it over to you. Are there any questions so far?
Not right now. I don't see any in the question box. So if you do have any questions, again, go to your webinar or GoToMeeting panel, locate the question box. And if you can't find that and you're used to GoToMeeting, go ahead and put them in the chat box and I'll monitor that as well. If you want to ask your questions there, everybody's on mute. So if you want to ask your questions through the box, I'll monitor that and then bring them out during these pauses.
All right, great. Thank you, Steve. Okay. So what I've done here is I've logged into this internal BusinessObjects server that we have at ALC. And what I've opened up is I've opened up a Web Intelligence report. And right now, what you're seeing is what 4.2 looks like. So 4.2, you'll notice that 4.2, in terms of just at first glance, really looks the same. So you don't need to worry about learning a new interface so much. I mean, the folder structures are the same, the tabs are the same, the links are the same in 4.2 as they would have been in 4.1. So all of that's really the same. It's just additional features that have been added on. So what you're looking at right now is a kind of demonstration report called the Graduate Summary Report. So this Graduate Summary Report is just pulling kind of fictitious data, and it's pulling 5-year trends of student graduates. So just to kind of give you a little walkthrough here, in the upper left-hand corner, I've got a bar chart showing the total number of students who have graduated each year. I've got a pie chart in the upper right showing my distribution of graduates between male and female. Here at the bottom, I've got a couple more tables. One table is showing me year-to-year graduate counts by program, so I can track, for example, the number of students who have graduated from computer science over the past 5 years. And then at the bottom, I have kind of a grand total table that shows me average GPA and total graduates for each program. So pretty simple. At the bottom, I also have a detail tab where if I wanted to drill down to the student level, I could see a listing of the students that have graduated, what program they graduated from, when they graduated, and what was their GPA. And then I just use a simple conditional formatting rule to highlight students who graduated with a 3.5 GPA or above. So that's this report that we're working from. Now, over on the left-hand side, we have a set of what are called input controls. If you're not familiar with these, I'll introduce this to you. So the input control in Web Intelligence is just a filter panel on the left-hand side. The input controls allow you to create these kind of real-time, dynamic, interactive filters. They could be radio boxes, check boxes, drop-downs, whatever it is. And it allows you to kind of in real time interact with the data. So for example, if I wanted to toggle this report so that I just see computer science graduates, on the left-hand side, I can click Computer Science, and the report will automatically recalibrate to show me here's what the 5-year graduate trends look like for computer science. Real simple, but extremely powerful. So if you're not already using input controls, I strongly recommend that you do. They're really easy to set up, and they add this really important layer of interactivity and kind of a dynamic nature to your reports. And they make them very flexible. So you can use one report, stock it out with a bunch of input controls, which then allows you to slice and dice and answer lots and lots of questions with just one report. But here's one thing to look at on the input controls. On the left-hand side, you'll notice I have an input control here for division chair. So I've got 2 division chairs in this report. I've got Albert Cash and Penny Smith. So if I select Albert on the left-hand side, you'll notice that the report recalibrates to show me all of the graduates, or all of the, all the statistics relevant to students who have graduated under programs associated with Albert Cash. And we can see down here at the bottom that it looks like that's basically general studies and nursing. So I selected Albert Cash, and the report automatically drilled down to show me just general studies and nursing, because apparently those are the programs that Albert oversees. But if I select Penny, now the report shows Penny's programs, which are business and computer science. But notice on the left-hand side, my program input control still shows all of the options. So as I select from Albert to all to Penny, the program options on the left-hand side don't change. So in other words, they're still showing all of the programs instead of only those programs that are relevant to my current selection criteria. So I selected Penny, I see business and computer science. On the left-hand side, though, I still see nursing, which doesn't really make any sense. If I were to select nursing, I would get no data because, of course, Penny doesn't oversee nursing. So in 4.2, one of the new features that came out was the ability to create cascading input controls or grouped input controls. So what this means is that I can configure my input controls so that when I select a division chair, like Albert, the other codes will automatically recalibrate to show me only those selections that are relevant to Albert or relevant to Penny. Let me show you how that works. So first I'm gonna, in the upper right-hand corner, I'm gonna click Design, and that's gonna take me into the kind of modify mode of this report. And again, this is all HTML. You'll notice how quickly it loaded. Now over on the left-hand side, here's my input controls panel. There's a new button up here called Group. I'm gonna click Group. And it's gonna ask me, okay, you wanna group your input controls. You kind of wanna tie them together. Which ones do you wanna tie together? And I'm gonna say division chair and program. So now I click OK. And now my division chair filter and my program filter are sort of tied together in a kind of cascading manner. So watch this. When I click Albert, the other options under program automatically recalibrate to show me only those programs that Albert oversees. Similarly, if I were to select Penny, it automatically shows business and computer science because the report knows that according to the data, the only programs to which Penny is connected are business and computer science. And so that makes your input controls on the left-hand side much, much more efficient. Let's say, for example, I see this all the time where people might have input controls for course subject and course name. Well, if you select art, your course name list is still going to show all 800 courses at your college instead of just that small subset of art courses. So it makes it very awkward and a little bit more difficult to use. This way, grouping your input controls, making them cascading using this new group button makes things much, much easier. So that's the cascading input controls. Very, very helpful. Again, I strongly recommend that you investigate using input controls because they'll make your reports much, much more efficient. Let's move on now to another new feature in Web Intelligence in 4.2, which is creating a sort of more of like an Excel-like functionality. So for those of you who use Excel, which I'm sure is all of you, you'll know that in Excel, when you're working with formulas, when you're working with your worksheets, you can, in an Excel document, you can reference any cell you want. So you can insert a column and say, I want this column to calculate column B plus column C, or I want this cell to be calculated as C6 divided by F2. Okay, so that kind of real easy sort of ability to just reference any cell in the worksheet or on any tab is one of the strong points of Excel. But that's never been something you could do in Web Intelligence. In Web Intelligence, you could never say, I want to take this cell here multiplied by this cell here minus this cell here. It's never something you've been able to do. But now you can. So one of the new things that's available in 4.2 is the concept of a cell reference. So what this means is that you can you can right-click on any cell in your report, any number in your report, and you can assign a reference to it. Once you've assigned a reference to it, that creates a field which then you can drag and drop and use anywhere you want. Use it for display, use it for calculations, whatever. So for example, let's say I want to take my computer science graduate count, this 114, and I want to assign a reference to it. So I'm going to right-click that number and choose Assign Reference. So right now, I'm going to take this cell, I'm referencing it, I'm going to give it a name. So computer science graduates. I click OK. Now over on the left-hand side, notice I've got a new field, which has a new icon and everything, and it's a reference. So here's how it works. I can now drag this field anywhere I want. I can put it into a new table. I can use it in a calculation, in a formula, whatever. And I can go further. I could maybe right-click my nursing GPA and assign a reference to that. Nursing GPA. And now that's another reference that I could add to my table, whatever it is. I could even get really, really granular. So for example, I could take like my business 2015 total, right-click, and assign it a reference. You can see how this works. So now I've got a new reference here, business grads in 2015. Click OK. It's now another reference, and I can add it anywhere I want. So now one of the reasons why this is so powerful is because if you had to do this before, it would have been quite complicated. You would have had to create all of these custom formulas to do the calculations and stuff like that. Now it's just as simple as pointing and clicking. I should also point out that it doesn't matter if, let's say you have a report with 5 queries in it, all pulling from maybe different universes. So people always ask me for ways in which they can simplify the process of pulling information from multiple universes or pulling information from multiple queries. Using the cell reference is a great solution to that. It certainly solves some of those problems. So you can create one table which includes cell references that point to multiple different tabs, multiple different queries, even multiple different universes. And the cell references, just like in Excel, are all dynamic. So let's say, for example, on the left-hand side, I toggle my input controls. So if I toggle my input controls, if I change gender to female, that will change not only the output above, so my business 2015 graduates, there's 13 of them, there were 13 females, Computer science graduates, there were 54. My nursing GPA was 3.4. And even as I'm toggling the input controls on the left-hand side, notice how the cell references are responding to that. So the cell references don't break. The cell references remain dynamic just as they would in Excel. So this is a very, very powerful tool. And again, I'll just demonstrate how you can, it doesn't matter what tab it is, you can pull these cell references onto any tab, anything like that. So this is a really huge feature in that it makes the process of creating reports, especially complicated calculations, summary data, reports with multiple queries. It makes that process much easier now, and it has that kind of connection back to Excel. So if you've used Excel a lot, this is the kind of functionality that you would be familiar with. Steve, I'll turn it over to you as I wonder if there's any questions on that.
We did have a question, but then you covered it. So you're being very thorough. Good job.
Okay, good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so that's so we've looked at a couple things so far. We've looked at the new ability in input controls, which were already extremely valuable, made your reports very flexible. We looked at the ability to create cascading input controls, which is that as you select your input controls, as you select one code, all of the other codes and the other filters automatically recalibrate to show you only the relevant subset. And we've also looked at this new feature for creating references.
Hey, Adam.
That is what. Yes.
For those who are already using input controls, did you just want to make mention a quick blurb about global input controls?
Yeah. So back in, I think it was 4.1 SP6, one of the things that SAP introduced was the ability to create an input control that would impact all tabs of your report. So that's what SAP calls the document input control, or you'll also hear it called the global input control. So when you're creating input controls, which is using this new button up here, you can create an input control that is relevant just to the tab that you're looking at, in which case the input control would be down in this lower box, or you can create an input control that filters all tabs of the report. And that's what we have right now. So right now we've got this document input control. So as I toggle from like Albert Cash to whatever, that automatically filters all of the other tabs of the report. And you can see as I move from tab to tab, I still see those same input controls. Okay. All right, cool. So we've talked about the cascading input controls. We talked about the cell references. Another thing I want to mention is one of the new features that SAP has introduced is the ability to create what are called shared elements. So a shared element is a way of creating this kind of modular type of development model, or this kind of collaborative development model for your reports. So here's what I mean. Let's say that I'm looking at this chart right here in the upper left-hand corner, this total graduates chart. I've spent a lot of time in this chart getting it formatted exactly the way I wanted to. Maybe it has variables in it that I spent a lot of time on. So it's got a lot of effort that's been put into it in terms of formatting, in terms of calculations and all of that. And as I'm creating this, I'm probably thinking, gee, there's maybe 5 other reports where I would love to have a chart just like that. Or there's probably my two other colleagues would probably love to be able to leverage that same chart. So before, it wasn't really quite possible to do that. You couldn't just take one object from one report and plop it into another, and that it just was never quite possible to create that kind of sharing of individual tables, individual charts. But now what you can do is you can take any chart, any table, any text box, anything that you want. You can right-click it, and you can choose to save it as a shared element. So once it's shared as a once it's saved as a shared element, then you can reuse that same chart in any other report, or your colleagues can reuse that chart or table or whatever it is in their reports too. So let me show you how that works. So I'm going to choose to save this chart as a shared element. So it allows me to choose where I want to save it. So I'll probably want to save it somewhere into a folder where I have access if I want to save it so that other people can use it. I'll make sure to save it in a folder where other people also have access to it. So I'm just going to go ahead and save this as my graduates trend chart. So I'm saving this as a report element. I click save and then I'm done. Now, if I go back to the Documents tab, you'll remember that I saved that element, that chart, into the graduates folder. And here it is. So now that saved element is saved into the shared elements folder. At the end of this, I'll kind of circle back on possibly what are some of the best practices around how to share these shared elements. But for now, we'll just leave it at this. So I've got the shared element here. Now I can't really open it. You don't really open the shared element here. This is just basically where it's stored for now. So let's say that I'm creating a new report and I think, gee, I shared that, I saved that chart before and I would really love to reuse that in this report. So right now, notice how this is a blank report. On the left-hand side, I don't really have anything, don't have many fields, no variables, but I want to import that chart. So on the top toolbar, I'm going to go to Linking, and I'm going to choose Shared Elements. I'm going to choose to insert a shared element. I can put it anywhere I want, and now it's going to say, which element do you want to reuse? And in this case, I want to reuse this one here, the graduate trends chart. So I click Open. My chart is now there. You'll notice that it's automatically loaded all of the relevant fields, including the variables. So everything comes with it. And I know some people might have some questions about that. So here's some of the nuances behind that. When you're taking a shared element and you're putting it into your report, SAP is first, or Web Intelligence, the tool is first going to check, do you have the fields necessary to show this report? If you do, then it'll just bring the chart in. But in this case, it was a blank report. I didn't have the fields in there. I didn't have the query in there that I needed. I didn't have the variables that I needed in there. So when I imported the chart, SAP said, okay, great. This is the chart that you need, and you don't have the fields, so I'll just put them in there for you. So it automatically set me up with a new query, and it automatically set me up with the variable that I needed. And now that I've got this chart, I can just use it as is, or I can make changes to it. So that's one of the cool things about this, is that you can use these shared elements. You can sort of reuse them as is, or you can use them as a sort of template or a baseline to create something slightly different. So that's why this is so powerful, is that it kind of just sort of streamlines a lot of those processes. I mean, we've all created those charts that have a lot of complicated formatting that we've spent a lot of time on, or we have those big tables that have lots of different filters and formulas embedded into them, and the thought of recreating it seems pretty daunting. But now what you can do is just take some of your favorite components or your most complicated components, share them, and then you can reuse them whenever you want to, or your colleagues can use them wherever you want to. Now, when you're going into 4.2, again, in the spirit of what do you need to know, you're going to have to start thinking about how you want to organize this whole shared elements model. So one of the things that you can do, I think that would be a good best practice, is to create sort of departmental shared elements folders.
Hey,
Because,
Adam, we do have a
yes,
couple questions on the shared elements. I'm not sure how far you're going to get into organization. But we had two questions. Would permissions for universes affect the ability to share elements successfully? Security issue. Did you just cover that part?
yeah. So if let's say you have a shared element that points to employee information, and then you save that shared element somewhere. And then another user comes by. Let's say this user does not have access to the employee universe or the employee data, whatever it is. They'll be able to see the shared element, but when they try to insert it in their report, remember that everything when you insert the element, everything comes with it, the fields, the query, everything. So the user might be able to see that shared element, but when they try to insert it into their report, Web Intelligence is going to say, whoa, this shared element is linked to a query which pulls data that you don't have access to, so sorry, I can't do this. So the permissions are all wrapped into that as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. Second question is, if you change the original chart, will it change in all reports you use the shared element in? So it sounds like it's about global changes.
Great question. So, and Web Intelligence allows you to go both ways on that. So if you want the report to, if you've reused a particular chart, a particular table in 5 other reports, and you want those 5 other reports to just kind of automatically update with, you want those other charts, whatever, to automatically update with the master copy, you can do that. That's just basically over on the left-hand panel, there's this new kind of little node network button, which is your shared elements menu. And I've got here a listing of all of the shared elements that I've inserted into my report. Like I only have one right now, which is this chart. So what I can do is I can click update, and then that will automatically synchronize this version of the shared element with the new master copy. Or if I didn't want to do that, if I just wanted to use the shared element as kind of a baseline or a template to create something new, I insert the shared element, and then over on the left-hand side, I click unlink. And now this shared element is no longer a shared element. It's just exclusively part of this report, and it's no longer connected to the master copy. So the answer to the question is that you can go both ways. If you want to synchronize the shared element with the master copy, you can do that, or you can have it be a separate standalone version.
Okay, and kind of a follow-up to that is, can you create a chart template without data in it so you can share just a template to get around the permissions issue? And it sounds like if we don't have data in there, there probably would be no permissions issue, but that is the question.
Yeah, you can do that. I mean, you can just create an empty chart object that's already preloaded with certain font properties and maybe like sizing and legend properties and stuff like that. So you can definitely do that. There's some formatting characteristics of the chart where you have to have some field plugged into it, but you could just plug a dummy field into it too. So yes, that's definitely possible.
Okay, great.
And in fact, that's one of the big, I think, oh, sorry, Steve, I was just going to say that's one of the, I think, the big advantages of the shared element is that you can use it as a template. So yeah, definitely. Okay, great. Any other questions?
I don't see any in the list, so good job. Thanks.
All right, cool. So in coming through this report, we've created, we've looked at some of the big new things in 4.2, like the cascading input controls. We've looked at how to create cell references, sort of like you would in Excel. We've looked at how we might take a chart that we really like or a chart that we want to use as a foundation for something else, and we've looked at how we can share it with other reports or other users. Another thing that comes up from time to time with web intelligence is so one of the things that we struggle with sometimes are reports running slowly. So I know from the attendee list that I know I've worked with many of you, and you have reports that often have to be very complicated. They might incorporate multiple queries. So some of you might have a single report that pulls data from multiple universes or uses multiple queries. Some of you might have reports with 2, 3, 4, or more queries all in one. So it used to be that in those cases where you had a report that had multiple queries, when you ran it, it would run the first query, and then when query number 1 was finished, it would run the second query, and then when that was finished, it would run the third query. So it would all run them back to back. But now in 4.2, there's this new feature of what's called parallel queries. You don't need to turn it on or anything, it's just automatically turned on. And how parallel queries work is that if you've got 3 queries in your report and you run that report, it'll run the 3 queries simultaneously. So you don't have to wait for the first one to be done, and then the second one to be done, and then the third one to be done. They'll just all kick off right away. And so if you had a report with 3 queries and each one took 10 seconds, before it would have been that the report total would have taken 30 seconds, right? Because 10 seconds, then 10 seconds, then 10 seconds. Now it'll just take 10 seconds because all those queries run simultaneously. So that's one of these things that where it makes your reports much more efficient, makes them run faster. So that's a huge thing. Another feature in 4.2 is just sort of continuing along the trend that SAP has been setting with respect to improving the kind of visualization capability of their reports. So for a long time now, SAP and Web Intelligence, they've invested a lot of effort into improving the quality and flexibility of their charts. And so now one of the charting options that we have is the ability to create geographic charts, maps. So you can create a couple different kinds of charts. So for example, this is an example of a map where we're sort of creating a shaded chart, a shaded geographic map, where the different shading corresponds to different values of the metric that whatever we're measuring. Here's another example where we're breaking it down by state. You can see it looks pretty clean. They're pretty easy to set up. This is an example of an international map, a global map that we created for a customer where they were looking at where their international students are coming from. So when you're creating your geographic charts in Web Intelligence, you can chart your information by country, like where your international students coming from by country. You can look at where your out-of-state students are coming. So you might create a chart that looks at the number of non-resident students by state. You can also map information by county. So like, let's say that in your service area, you have multiple counties. Perhaps you want to measure those on a map. You can measure county information as well. There are a couple of restrictions. One is that you cannot visualize city boundaries. You can plot on a map in Web Intelligence the city, but it would just be a dot on the map. You can't actually plot the boundary of a city. And you also can't plot the zip code information. So you can plot information by country, by state, by county, but you can't plot anything by zip code or school district, at least not yet. The geographical charting in Web Intelligence has come a long way over the past couple of years, but it's not quite at the level of something like a Tableau. So we work with customers on Tableau all the time and commonly create mapping visualizations. And still Tableau is far superior with its ability to do geographic mapping. But if you just needed the ability to embed a kind of a simple map into your report, the new features in 4.2 are perfect for doing that. Okay. One of the things you'll see in 4.2 you might read about is these new report commentary features. So you can open up a report and you can basically have a discussion thread along the left-hand side. Honestly, I don't know how useful people will find this, but we've been looking at some possible use cases for this. So one of the things that you could do with this new commentary function is that when you create the report, you can use the comment thread as a sort of change log. So you could say, on this date, I added this field for this person. On such and such date, I added this new tab, and here's why. So you can sort of use that as a sort of embedded documentation feature that's all date stamped and everything like that. And so I think that could be very helpful. This commentary feature is still really new, so not many best practices have emerged on that. And so that brings us to the administration side of this. So in Web Intelligence, there's so many new features in 4.2, too many to really dive into in detail here in this 1-hour session, but we went through some of the headlines. So before we move on to the administrators piece, I want to just pause and turn it over to Steve to see if there's any questions we need to answer.
Yeah, I may have missed one back on parallel queries. So if it's too hard to go back, maybe we can follow up with Sarah after offline. But the general question when you're talking about the parallel queries, does all of that still work and still have the same advantages when your second query is dependent on your first query? So I guess the question is around what happens when queries are dependent on each other with parallel queries.
Yeah, great question. So if one query is dependent on another, so some of you may have run into this where, let's say, query number 2 pulls all of the students, pulls like certain information for whichever students appear in query number 1. So there's certain types of filters in Web Intelligence where there's a filter option called results from another query. And so in those cases, you have 2 queries that are dependent on each other. In those cases, they'll still run back to back because they have to. So it'll still run, it won't break those, in other words. It'll still run the first query to get that kind of filter list, which will then feed into query number 2. So this new parallel query engine, it still understands how to work with the queries that are dependent on each other, and in those cases, they'll still run as they always have.
Great, thank you.
All right, cool, thank you. Okay, so let's move on to what's new for system administrators. So if you are in the IT department or your job is to manage business objects and Web Intelligence and all of its components, there's lots of new things to know about 4.2. But again, we'll focus on the highlights. And so we'll look at the new recycle bin function, the CMS data access driver, and the new scheduling options. Even if you're not familiar, even if you're not in IT, I think that these will still be valuable for you to know just that they're out there, certainly. So one of the new features is this recycle bin. So it used to be in all prior versions, everything before 4.2. If I accidentally deleted a report from the public folders, that report was just gone. You know, you couldn't get it back unless you restored some backup, some like backup of the server, but you couldn't just individually restore reports. But now that's changed. So let me show you an example. So I'll come back into Business Objects, and let's say I look at this report right here. Report with chart is the name of the report. I'm going to right click, and against my better judgment, I'm going to click delete. So I've now deleted that report. You'll see it's gone from the list, nowhere to be seen. But then the next day I realize, oh shoot, you know what? I really shouldn't have deleted that report. Now I can't get it back. What do I do? So that's when your system administrator comes in to save the day. So with this new recycle bin feature, so I'm logged into this utility called the Central Management Console. This is kind of the administrator's interface to business objects. Your system administrator can click on the recycle bin. They can see that report that you just deleted. Right-click, restore. And now that report is back and ready to use. So it's real simple to restore reports. You can restore one report at a time. You can restore 500 reports at a time. So it's all very, very easy. So those cases always kind of pop up from time to time where somebody will accidentally delete a user, delete a report, and then that report is just gone and it's hard to get back. Now that's really not a problem anymore. Okay, the other thing is in 4.2 is this new piece called the CMS data access driver. So what this allows you to do, and this is brand new, there's really never been anything like this in SAP BusinessObjects, is the ability to query your system metadata. So here's what I mean by that. Like, let's say that you want to be able to get a listing of all of your reports and where they're stored. You want to be able to get a listing of all of your users, who's assigned what type of license, when did that user last log in. You might want to look at what are all the reports that a certain person created. All of that system metadata that's so valuable that right now, if you're using 4.1, is very difficult, if not impossible to get. But now with what's called the CMS data access driver, it's now possible to create a simple web intelligence report using this new delivered universe to pull out information. So for example, this is a query this is an example of a query where you could get a listing of all WebE reports, all web intelligence reports that have been created or updated since June 10th of 2017. Or here's a report that we pulled out of our internal server that's got a listing of users, which users are named users versus concurrent users. Those are just different license types. When those user accounts were created, when they last logged in, all that kind of stuff. So a lot of really, really valuable information that you could pull out of here that's helpful as you're managing the tool, trying to understand who's using the system, what types of reports are out there, all that kind of stuff. And then the last thing that we'll cover are some new scheduling options. So these are really cool. If you've heard me talk about scheduling before, you'll know that I'm a huge advocate for scheduling your report. So whenever you have a report that you need to be run on a set basis, like you have a report that you need to get every Monday or you need it the 15th of every month, you may as well just schedule it so that it runs automatically. So even if you're out sick, you're out on vacation, you know the report is going to go out. Then that way you don't have to waste your time just running the report every day. So anytime you can schedule reports, it'll just make sure that people are actually seeing the data, that it's getting run, the log is kept of the information, all that kind of stuff. So you can schedule, just as you always have been able to, you can schedule reports to, so like let's say I want to schedule this graduate summary report that we were looking at earlier. That's this one. Let's say I want to schedule that report, so I right-click, choose schedule. And just as I've always been able to, I can set how often I want the report to run, like every day or every week, etc. I can choose to send the report out via Excel or PDF. I can choose to send the report out via email. So I could send it out via email, or I could drop it on an FTP, or I could drop it somewhere on my network. And so you can still do all that same stuff. And all your schedules that are working right now in 4.1, they'll continue to work in 4.2 when you upgrade. But there's a few important new things. One is that there's this new menu called Delivery Rules. And there's now two options. This is a new menu. So this first option, when you check this box, what happens here is that if the scheduled report doesn't actually run successfully, or maybe the query times out, it won't even bother sending you a report. So it used to be that if the query timed out and just had partial data, it would still send you the report, which could potentially cause confusion. But now you can say the schedule only send out the report if the scheduled content has been successfully refreshed. The other option, which I think is even cooler, is to say only send the report out if it actually contains data. So we all have, I'm sure many of you have seen or created like these daily reports or weekly reports that are sent out for any number of reasons, maybe validation or whatever, but more often than not, they don't have any data. And now, before, it used to just be that you would get the report, you'd have to open it, and then, oh, it's blank, I'll close it, and the next day you open it, oh, it's blank. But now what you can do is you can schedule a report, and you can have it run every day if you wanted to. And it will only actually go out to the user if there's actual data in it. So for example, you might create a report called classes canceled yesterday. And that report is designed to show only those classes that were canceled yesterday. It might go out to the payroll folks to adjust their payroll records. It might go out to the registrar to make sure they process the cancellation drops accordingly. Now, if you run that report every day, most of the time it's going to be blank. But now if you check this box, it'll only go out if classes were actually canceled yesterday and there's data in the report. So that's another cool feature. There's also some new formatting options. So one is this comma-separated values CSV reports option. What this does is you can schedule a report so that the actual content of the report, not the query, but the actual content of the report will come to you as a CSV file. The other option, which is kind of interesting, is the HTML archive option. So when you schedule a report to be sent to you as an HTML archive, what BusinessObjects will do is it'll take that report, it'll take all the data, all the tabs, and it'll bundle it basically as a web page, which you can then take and post to your intranet site, post to your public site if you wanted to, whatever. Now, I've already done this. I scheduled the graduate summary report. I scheduled it as an HTML archive, and I downloaded it. And what it gave me was this zip file. So it gave me a zip file called graduate summary report. And so I unzipped it, and I've got all these components. It's just a bunch of different files. It's got some images in here, everything like that. So basically everything that was in the report is now inside of this kind of bundled web page. And I can open up Index. Again, all this was just created for me by the tool. And now I've got this report has now been converted to this static web page. It's got tabs on the top, just like my report has, all that kind of stuff. So I could see a lot of really interesting use cases behind this. Perhaps you have an annual report with, whatever. You might want to run it to an HTML archive, hand it off to your web developer if you wanted to. They could kind of tweak it around, make sure it's all properly branded, and then publish it to your intranet site or your public website. So some cool options there, definitely to check out. But again, so scheduling your reports in general is best practice. You'll definitely want to make sure that you're doing that whenever you can. But now with the new ability to put rules on your scheduled reports and with the new formatting options, it just makes it that much more powerful.
Hey, Adam.
Yes.
On that HTML, will it update on the website next time it runs and refreshes? Does it? Do you know? Can you create? I guess a link to from the website to the scheduler.
So the actual contents of the HTML archive are all static, completely disconnected from the database. But what you could do is you could just set up the scheduled report to automatically push out a new copy of the HTML files every week or something like that, or maybe every day, and then work with your web team to make sure that those HTML files are going to some location where they can pick them up, either automatically or whatever.
Okay.
So if you wanted a new copy of the HTML content, you just have to make sure that report is scheduled to push out the new content.
Okay, and do you know, I mean, based on the files that you were in those folders, is the data behind the reports? I'm assuming the question is, I'm assuming around the raw data, is it packaged in any way that the users could get back to that data, or is it just that static file that you were just showing on the screen?
Yeah, the only thing that's inside of the HTML file is the data that's actually displayed in the report. So if there's any sensitive information or whatever that's not actually displayed, then it won't be, you won't find it anywhere in the HTML file.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so just to wrap up here, we'll talk about kind of what would be your next steps on this. So the first thing, if I strongly recommend adopting 4.2 as soon as you can. 4.2, as I said, it's not a new version. It's been out by SAP for a couple of years now, so it's already very well vetted. Like I said, we use it internally. We have customers that use it, and it's I would say a very solid a very solid release. Now, for those of you who have purchased SAP Business Objects through a third party, like Lucien, I know many of you use the CROA tool, which is a reporting platform for colleague customers that has SAP Business Objects included in that. You'll need to wait for Lucien to certify the product, so you can follow up with your account manager or whatever to check on the progress of that. But in order to actually adopt 4.2 and upgrade, you'll need to follow these steps. So the first thing that you'll need to do is contact whomever you bought the product from, SAP Business Objects. For many of you, that's probably Lucien. And you'll request your new license key. You don't have to pay for it. It's just a new license key code that you have to plug into the installer. And then you'll download the 4.2 documentation, kind of go through that, and you can refer to the links that I mentioned at the very beginning. At those links, you'll also find the supported platform documents. So you can make sure that you're using a supported version of Windows Server. You can get all the latest supported platforms there. One thing to remember, for those of you who were using the Business Objects 3.1 and then you migrated to 4.1, you'll remember that you had to set up a new server for 4.1. With 4.2, you actually don't have to do that. So so long as your existing server has all the necessary sort of like hardware, software requirements, and you're fine just using that server, then you can just apply the patch directly to your 4.1 server to upgrade you to 4.2. You don't have to get a new server. But if you did want to create a new server, a new virtual server, you could do that. You would just install 4.2 as a fresh installation on the new server, and then migrate your content from 4.1 to 4.2. So you can go both routes. But again, it's not like when you were going from 3.1 to 4.1, where you had to spin up a new server. You don't have to do that for this one. And then I definitely recommend planning. Create some planning around the upgrade. Make sure that you do the upgrade during downtime, off hours, over the weekend, whatever, because it can take a full day for the upgrade to run. And then I definitely recommend planning for some Delta training because of the fact that there are so many new features in 4.2. You'll want to make sure that you and your team, you have all the necessary information to fully leverage all of the new features in 4.2 so that you're using the tool to the best of your ability.
And to that point as well, we had a question if 4.1 Web Intelligence reports would run in 4.2. So did you want to speak to that briefly? I know we're a little over on time. Are you there, Adam?
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah.
Yes, the Web Intelligence reports that you have right now in 4.1, they'll certainly run in 4.2. They'll migrate over cleanly, and you'll continue to use them and modify them just as you always have. Any scheduled reports will continue to run just as you always have. So that's definitely not a problem. We've done migrations internally here. We've done migrations with customers, and moving reports from 4.1 to 4.2 has never been a problem. So yeah, definitely rest assured that there are currently no issues that I'm aware of with respect to moving 4.1 content to 4.2, and we've seen customers do it, and it works very well.
Okay, and we did around the admin section. We had two questions. One, let's see if we can go back in time to the presentation. When you restore a report, do you know, will that report restore with its creator connected to it, or does it come back in as an administrator? Does it reassign it to the administrator?
I believe that it just comes in exactly as it always was, so it's still the same owner and everything like that. But we can confirm that too. But I'm 90% positive that it comes in with the original owner and doesn't reassign it to the administrator.
Right. Okay. And then we had a question, in terms of when scheduling and refreshing and things failing, will the system send an email notifying the admin that the report has failed to refresh? So it's specifically on the refresh option.
Yeah, you can configure your scheduled reports to alert you if a job fails to run. That's also another use case of this new CMS data access driver. So one of the things that you can do is you could create a report that would show you, here are all of the scheduled jobs, the scheduled reports that tried to run but failed. And you, either the users or the administrators, they can monitor that report to make sure that they're staying on top of which reports ran versus which ones failed to run. So there's a few different options to tackle that.
Okay, great. That's all I had on our end. I know that we're 10 past the hour, but I wanted to say thank you to everyone as well. If you do have any other questions, or if I did miss that, my apologies. Please do drop us a line, follow up with us, and we'll get an answer out to you as soon as possible.
Absolutely. And yeah, definitely. Thank you everyone for joining. Again, we'll send the recording out later, so you're free to reference that later, share it with your colleagues. And again, stay tuned because we'll have more of these types of webinars, both on business objects, Tableau, and other reporting and analytics topics for higher education in the near future. So again, thank you very much to everyone, and have a great week.
Okay, thank you.